Greetings and welcome to the Cancer Interviews podcast. I'm your host, Bruce Morton, and on this segment, we have a special guest with a powerful story. He is Dave Dravecky of Mesa, Arizona. A rare form of cancer cut short his career as a Major League Baseball player, resulting in the amputation of his pitching arm. But Dave responded with perseverance, faith, and the strength that came therefrom. It's a story we hope will resonate with you, and if you share it with somebody else, we hope it resonates with them too. So now let's get started. And Dave, welcome to Cancer Interviews.
Thank you, Bruce. It's great to spend some time with you.
Dave, now everybody has a different story in terms of their cancer journey, but we always like to start off from the same place, and that is we would like to get to know a little bit more about you, exclusive of your cancer journey. And keep in mind, we have an interesting mix in terms of our audience. There are some people who are intimately familiar with your story, and other people, anything that you say, they're going to be hearing for the first time. So against that backdrop, if you would tell us a little bit about where you're from and what you've done for a living and what you're doing now, that sort of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I was born and raised in Youngstown, Ohio, and it was there that this dream was birthed in me to play baseball. But I was also really, really active in sports. Played basketball, played football, ran track. And I loved just being active as an athlete, but I took to baseball and through my amateur career started developing my skills to the point where in high school, my coach actually looked at me and said, I think you can play at the next level, Dave. And this was in my senior year of high school. And I'll never forget, I was so excited because I thought, man, I've got the talent to go to the next level. I have this dream that one day I would actually be good enough to be the next Sandy Koufax or Vida Blue, because those were my two heroes growing up as a kid. And it was really interesting. I waited and waited after my senior year, and no university across the country recruited me to play for them. Not one. And so I did the next best thing because I love baseball so much. I stayed local. Being in Youngstown, Ohio, I walked on at Youngstown State University. And I had the opportunity of playing for 4 years at Youngstown State baseball. And after my fourth year there, I was drafted in the 21st round by the Pittsburgh Pirates. And it was just a dream come true for me because now I was a professional baseball player. And I was so excited about this opportunity. From there, I progressed through the minor leagues, and then I got traded from the Pittsburgh Pirates to the San Diego Padres. And so this baseball career began, and I was overwhelmed by the fact that I was able to experience my dream come true. And so, here's this kid from Youngstown, Ohio, and all of a sudden, he finds himself on the brink of making it to the big leagues. And it was just a wonderful place for me to be in. And through that whole experience, Bruce, about the only other thing that I did in my life was to work for my father for 1 year in a machine shop. And I hated that because I couldn't stand being inside and actually working in grease and dirt. And so I did that for a year. And then after that, I chose to be in the landscaping industry because I figured if I didn't make it in baseball, that's what I wanted to do with my life because I loved being outdoors. I loved actually working in the dirt, but outside. And so that was the desire of my heart. But then all of a sudden, this baseball thing started to become a reality. And it was after being traded to the Padres that the next year, in 1982, I made it to the big leagues. And so I spanned that career from 82 to 89, and I know we'll talk about that. But then after going through all that I went through in battling cancer and then eventually retiring, and then from there having to experience more cancer and ultimately lose my arm, the big question was, what was Dave going to do with his life? And as an amputee, I couldn't define that. I didn't know what I would do. And so all of a sudden I had these incredible opportunities to tell my story. And then out of that, we had the opportunity to start a nonprofit, a ministry called Endurance with Jan and Dave Dravecky to encourage cancer patients, amputees, people who lose loved ones, and depression, folks who experience depression. So my journey That's a loaded question that you've asked, because my journey has been amazing with all these different aspects of my story. But I say all of that, Bruce, to say this. Every one of us has that story to tell. Every one of us. And each story is powerful in and of itself. And just because I was elevated to a place of being under the quote unquote limelights of Major League Baseball doesn't mean that my story is any more important than the story of the person that's listening to this podcast or to this Zoomcast.
Now, Dave, in a long ago chapter in my life, I broadcast minor league baseball at the Class A level, and every guy on that team had a dream of getting to the big leagues, but only one of them, two of them, out of all the guys I was around in 3 seasons, made it to the big leagues. You did. If you would, share with us what that was like the first time you stood atop a major league mound and you were going to face major league hitters. So at that point, you had to be truly realizing your dream.
Yes. After working really hard in the minor leagues, I had one advantage going for me because I didn't throw very hard, but I was left-handed. And back then, they were looking for left-handers who could actually throw strikes and get people out. And so during my minor league career, I worked my way to the point after 4 years of finally being called up to the big leagues with the Padres. And Bruce, that first day, to be honest with you, I cannot tell you what it was like because I don't remember. It was so overwhelming to me. All I remember as I sit here is I can tell you that I can picture myself at the San Diego airport getting out of the cab with my duffel bag of uniform and equipment stuff and going to the ballpark. But I can only tell you about my first appearance as a big leaguer standing on the mound if I go back and look at the stats, because I was so overwhelmed by this dream that had come true for me, because I never thought it would. I was this kid from Youngstown, Ohio. I mean, no one had come out of Youngstown to play at the big league level, I think, except Jack Mayo, who was with the Whiz Kids in the 50s with the Phillies. And so, and I only know that because I'm not a history buff, but it's because Jack has told me, because I know him. And as a result of that, I was like the first kid to get to the big leagues in a long time from Youngstown. So nobody expects that to happen from that part of the country. It's cold. You don't get to play baseball year round. And so for me to be standing on that mound, it was absolutely overwhelming. But I can tell you this, I do remember standing on the mound and looking at the hitter, and every one of them that came to the plate looked like Babe Ruth. And I wondered whether or not I could even get him out. So the experience was one of exhilaration. It was one of anxiety. It was one of fear. It was one of gratefulness. But at the same time, trying to remember that specific moment, it just eludes me because it was so overwhelming.
Now, let's hit the fast forward button up to 1988. In 1988, at some point, you learned that something wasn't quite right and that doctors needed to take a look at you. Under what circumstances did you learn something was wrong? And once you inquired, what did you find out?
Well, it actually was in 1987 when I was traded from the San Diego Padres to the San Francisco Giants. I had just come off of 5 years with the Padres where I was in an all-star game and a World Series against Detroit Tigers in 1984. But then all of a sudden I got traded from a last place team to a first place team, which was amazing. And we had gone into postseason play, and I pitched the 2 best games of my career as a Giant against the Cardinals in the National League Championship Series. So that year, coming off of that year, I was so excited about the next year. But I had noticed halfway between my shoulder and my elbow in the winter of 87, a small pea-sized lump. And so I got permission from the Giants to go to the San Diego doctors, and they did an MRI. And that MRI did not reveal anything. So they said, look, we'll just keep an eye on it. It doesn't seem to be anything right now, but but if anything changes, just let us know. And so I went through the winter. I prepared for the regular season, went to spring training in 1988. Roger Craig told me I was going to be the opening day pitcher against the Los Angeles Dodgers. And I got to tell you, I was not thinking about this small little pea-sized lump. I was excited about the new year coming off of 87 and pitching so well, thinking 1988 was going to be my year. Keep in mind, in the background, as to our earlier conversation before coming online, we were talking about Oral Hershiser. Well, 1988 was actually Oral Hershiser's year, but I thought it was going to be mine. And so we started the season. I was the opening day pitcher for the San Francisco Giants against the Los Angeles Dodgers at Chavez Ravine, Dodger Stadium, with a packed house and facing Fernando Valenzuela. I mean, in the baseball world, you can't paint a better picture than that. And we defeated the Dodgers that day 5-1. So needless to say, I was thinking that, 1988 was going to be my year. But by the end of that year, that lump had grown to half the size of a golf ball on the outside of my left arm, halfway between the shoulder and the elbow. And needless to say, there was tremendous concern as they watched it grow. And we got an MRI, and that MRI revealed, in fact, that I did have cancer.
So you had been diagnosed, and following diagnosis has to come treatment. And what did treatment entail?
Well, you know what? It was really interesting because in the examining room, Jan and I were sitting there, and up until that point, the conversation around the lump in my arm was that it was more than likely Blocker's bruise. And what had happened was, because of the amount of throwing that I was doing, in some cases this can occur where micro muscle fiber can tear and calcify and harden into a mass. And so going into the examining room after the MRI, that's all we're thinking. And the door happened to be open about 3 or 4 inches in the examining room. And we heard the doctors coming towards our rooms. So we were anticipating they were going to come in and tell us that, in fact, it was, a benign fibrous thing that was like a Blocker's bruise. But then they stopped and put the films under the lights outside the examining room, and we heard the word tumor. And we were shocked. We were just sitting there. We stared at each other and said, we didn't even say a word. We just looked at each other and was like, tumor? Cancer? And in that moment, I looked at Jan and I just said, it was just this really natural response for me. Let's pray. We need to pray. Before the doctors come in, we need to pray. And I don't wax eloquently when I pray, Bruce. So I just said a simple prayer, and it kind of went, God, we have no idea what we're about to face, but whatever it is, give us the strength to endure the journey. That's all I ask. And in that moment, the doctors came in and they said that, in fact, I had cancer in my left arm, and that they would have to go in and do surgery and remove 50% of my deltoid muscle. And what I learned was that in removing the 50% of my deltoid muscle, that you're going to actually lose 95% use of that muscle. And the doctors said, Dave, based on what we have to do to you, outside of a miracle, you're never going to pitch again. Never. And in my mind, I thought, because at this time I had already become a Christian, and in my mind, I thought, you know what, God, you're in control of this picture. The doctors are limited in what they know, but based on what they know, I have to trust everything that they're saying and what they're going to do, because I believe you've placed them in my life to care for me. And so when they said, outside of a miracle, you'll never pitch, I thought, okay, that's the reality of what we see. But what we don't know is, what is God's plan for Dave's life moving forward? What's this going to look like? And I thought, okay, I have 2 choices. I can just focus on getting my health in order and retire from baseball, or I can focus on getting my health in order and try and make a comeback. And then the question came into my mind, Bruce, at that point, if I walk away from the game now, I'm going to wonder for the rest of my life if I could have made a comeback. I don't want to live like that. That's not how I was raised. my dad always said, work as hard as you can to be the best you can. Don't quit. Keep going until somebody says you can't do it anymore. And he said, in the process, whatever you choose to do, have fun doing it. And that's exactly what I was doing. I wasn't a professional baseball player. I was a little kid playing a big kid's game and having so much fun at it. And then on top of it, you get paid to do it, And so, it was this incredible place that I found myself in. So I thought, you know what, I'm going to keep trying, because until somebody slams the door and I can't pitch and they tell me I can't do that, I'm going to keep moving forward with that goal in mind. And fast forward, after 10 months of, number one, intense surgery, 10 and a half hours of surgery to remove the mass in my arm, along with doing cryosurgery, which froze and killed all the cancer cells and my bone, my humerus bone in my left arm. After that, I now had to heal. And the doctors said, none of us know whether or not your bone will be able to grow back and be strong enough to manage throwing a baseball because of the cryosurgery. And it was a roller coaster ride, Bruce. It was a roller coaster ride physically. It was a roller coaster ride emotionally, and it was a roller coaster ride spiritually. There were days when I felt awesome, and there were days when I felt horrible. And there were days when I was somewhere in between. But through the encouragement of my teammates, the organization, the doctors, the nurses, the therapists, the physical therapists, the trainers, all those people that were involved, through their encouragement, one step at a time, got me to the point where on August 10th, 1989, I was standing on the mound getting ready to pitch again in the big leagues, not just minor league baseball, but in the big leagues against the Cincinnati Reds.
And how did that feel to know that when we talk about journeys, this was its own journey, getting you back to a big league mound in 1989. So I asked you how you felt being on top of a big league mound, facing your first big league hitter. How did it feel to be on that mound in Cincinnati in August?
It was awesome. Trust me, I do remember that one. And it was a really good experience standing on the mound. And the first thing that flooded over me, Bruce, was to give thanks to God for the chance to be back on the mound again. And here's why I say that. I am so thankful for all the people that he put in my life every step of the way that allowed me to get back to that level and perform once again at the highest level of professional baseball. And so I was just overwhelmed with thankfulness. But then in that moment, it was like, oh my gosh, I'm getting ready to play again. It's time to strap it on and go get them. And I stood on that mound and the umpire said, play ball. And it was like, for love of the game, the movie with Kevin Costner, when he's standing on the mound and his vision is very blurry because the noise and all the things that are going on around him are actually impacting where he's at on that mound in that moment. But then all of a sudden he says this phrase, clear the mechanism. And in clearing the mechanism, it was like the camera took away all the fog and cloudiness and brought into focus this narrow stream right down to the catcher's glove, to the point where he could read the words on the glove in the pocket. And that's exactly what it felt like as I was standing on the mound. In essence, when the umpire said play ball, it was like I heard clear the mechanism, get your focus, and lock in. And that day, I threw 93 pitches. Now, get this. Take today. You've lived in the baseball clubhouse. You've understood the game of baseball and how players are treated today in the context of injuries. Do you think for 1 minute today that if it was me having that comeback game, that I would have been permitted, number one, to go 93 pitches, number two, to go eight full innings onto a victory? No, That would have never happened today. Never. I would have had a very strict pitch limit, probably no more than 25 to 35 pitches. The moment I hit that number, they would have taken me right out of the game. But here's the thing that's even more interesting in this story as to it relating to the comeback game. And this is where people who have very little understanding of my story through baseball can now relate. Because on that day, KNBR, the flagship station, radio station for the San Francisco Giants, announced that there was a little boy by the name of Alex Vlahos that was battling leukemia. And about a week earlier, I had met with him and his family, and we had done a public meeting with a news station to bring awareness into the community about Alex's story. And on that day, Isabel Lemon, who was the executive director, general manager of KNBR at the time, went on the airwaves to announce and challenge money for every pitch that I threw to help little Alex find a bone marrow donor, because he was about to get a bone marrow transplant to save his life. And they needed to get people to donate blood to see if they could find a match. And so I'm driving into the ballpark that day, and I hear on the radio what's going to happen. And I'm like, oh my gosh, talk about adding more pressure. Now, the weight of this 6-year-old's life is in the balance of this game called baseball and the number of pitches that I throw. And that day, and I don't share this very often, but that day I walked into Roger Craig's office and I said, have you heard what's going on the radio? He said, no, tell me. He said, well, you're familiar with the story I did with little Alex? He said, yes. I said, well, they've just announced to the community of San Francisco and all the Bay Area fans that with every pitch, they're going to donate money to help this little boy get a bone marrow transplant. And I looked at him and I said, Roger, I said, hum baby, you know what that means, don't you? You've got to let me go at least 100 pitches. And he looked at me and he says, Dave, I understand what you're saying, but you need to hear me. We're in a pennant race. We need to win a ball game. I said, look, I get that, but let me go. Don't pull me in when I'm going well. Let me go. I've got to get as many pitches for this kid as I possibly can. And that day, throwing 93 pitches, they raised over $200,000 in a community that most people were aware of what was going on with Alex, but didn't know him, and yet stepped up to the plate, no pun intended, stepped up to the plate and donated over $200,000 to help offset the costs of over 7,000 people that came forward that day to donate blood to see if they could be a match. Bruce, that was overwhelming to me. That was the story. My comeback was a platform. Baseball was just a platform, and so I as I stood there, I was overwhelmed. After the game, Alex actually was there, and he came into the clubhouse. They let him into the clubhouse, and in the press conference, I was holding him in my arms. I have a photo of Alex and I together in the press conference. And one of the reporters looked at Alex and said, so Alex, how do you think Dave did? And Alex, with this big old smile on his face, looked at the reporter and said, he did good. And that was his words. And it was so precious. Now, here's the sad but yet joyful part of this story. Alex passed away a year later, and it was really sad. But over 7,000 people came forward. And in 2014 or 2015, we had a celebration for my 25-year anniversary of the comeback game. And Alex's dad was invited, Alex's mom and dad. Gene and Sue Vlahos were invited. And Gene came up to me during the celebration and said, Dave, I know how much it hurt when you heard we lost Alex, but I want you to know that there have been at least 8 to 10, maybe 12 people who have said, because of that blood drive, their family member was able to find a match, a perfect match, so that they could have a bone marrow transplant and their lives were saved. So that story, Bruce, is just a story I'll never forget. It's at the center of what I would deem the comeback story.
By the way, if you like what you hear on this segment, we invite you to subscribe to our podcast by checking the links below. Once there, you will see a bell icon, and if you click on that, we will notify you when we post a new interview. We're talking to Dave Dravecky of Mesa, Arizona. And Dave, this is probably the most difficult part of our conversation because we just heard this heartwarming story. And I'm going to shift gears to something that, when it happened, certainly was not heartwarming. But your comeback hit a very difficult point later that season in Montreal Olympic Stadium. If you would, could you just take us through the events of that night and what happened and its aftermath?
Yes. As a matter of fact, I'd like to share it around the context of something that happened a few years ago. I happened to be on a boat with some friends that had invited my wife and I to go on a boat trip with them down the St. Lawrence Seaway, Bruce. And we felt so fortunate to be on this trip. It was a moment in our life where we really needed some R&R. And as we were floating down the St. Lawrence Seaway, taking our ride, we came around a bend, and all of a sudden, out from the horizon stood this enormous structure called Olympic Stadium, which was the place where I threw my last pitch in my career. And my dear friend who was standing next to me said, "Oh my gosh, Dave, are you okay? What's wrong?" And I looked at him and I said, "Craig, you're not going to believe this, but that's where I threw my last pitch. That's Olympic Stadium." And he said, "Stay right there. I'll be right back." And he ran into the cab of the boat and came out with 2 large glasses of Cabernet Sauvignon. And he handed me one. And this is what was so beautiful about it. He did not say a word, Bruce. He just raised his glass and we toasted. And we stood there for 10 minutes in silence, and he allowed for all those feelings and emotions to rush over me. And so in those emotions, I'm reminded of going back and remembering about 4 hours prior to that game, having a conversation with Bob Nepper. And we were having my pregame meal, and it was August 15th, 1989. And we were just talking about how amazing this experience was and the miracle that had taken place in my story with me getting back on the mound. And Bob looks at me and he goes, "Dave, I hate to burst your bubble, but it's not the miracle of your comeback here that's so significant. It's the miracle of salvation. It's the miracle of you meeting Jesus back in 1981 when you were challenged to read the Bible and coming to faith and putting your trust in him. That is the real story here. That's the real miracle. And what God is doing is giving you a platform through baseball to share his love with those who hurt." And I thought to myself, wow, that's really cool, Bob. But I'm 4 hours away from a start. I'm getting ready to throw a baseball game. So all I've got on my mind is pitching this game. So now fast forward to the game, and we're in the 6th inning, and I'm pitching so well. And it's like, oh my gosh, this is going to be amazing. I'm going to finish my career strong. I'm going to finish out the season strong. I'm going to get a new contract. I was thinking about all these things out in front of me as a result of what was going on in the present. And in the 6th inning, Tim Raines comes to the plate, and Terry Kennedy calls for a sinking fastball on the outside part of the plate. I rear back to throw that pitch, and my left arm snaps in half as I release the ball towards home plate. And it was like you could hear, actually, I have people who have said, including Will Clark, that it sounded like a gunshot because he was playing first base. And he said, "Dave, it was like somebody had shot a gun from on the upper deck and you dropped. That's how loud the crack of your bone was." And I went laying there on the ground. And I have to tell you, Bruce, I wasn't in a mode of, why me? Why is this happening to me now? I was actually overwhelmed with Bob Knepper's words 4 hours earlier. All I could hear in my mind was what Bob was saying. The miracle is the miracle of salvation, and God has given you a platform through baseball to share his love with those who hurt. And I thought, what in the world does that mean? I'm laying on the ground, and I think I caught a glimpse through hearing those words of what it might look like, but I wasn't sure. Because truthfully, as I was laying there, I knew that more than likely my career had come to an end. But at the same time, I was overwhelmed with this thought in my mind as to what Bob had just said to me. They rushed me to the hospital to get x-rays. I ended up having a spiral oblique, which was where the bone literally was spiraling, was rotating and breaking at the same time. And so it was splintered. It wasn't a straight break. It was splintered. And what's really bizarre is the doctor prescribed who did the x-rays and then saw me afterwards and confirmed it was a break, prescribed a strong dose of pain medication for me. And I got in the cab. I went back to the hotel, went into my room. Scotty Garrelts, Atlee Hammaker, Brett Butler, Greg Linton, Jeff Brantley, all those guys were waiting for me in my room. And we began, and then the door was left open because a couple guys started knocking on the door to check up on me. And all of a sudden we just decided, keep the door open. And in comes Roger Craig and Norm Sherry, who I love dearly, who just passed away a couple days ago. He was one of my favorite pitching coaches. I've had several. Galen Cisco, Eddie Watt was my AA manager in Amarillo, Texas for the Padres, who really taught me the art of pitching. But Norm was so near and dear to my heart, and he really knew me personally. So he knew what to say when he came out to the mound to correct me. And Norm came in, Roger Craig came in, Bob Lillis, Dusty Baker, all these guys came in. All my teammates kept coming in, and they were all checking up on me to make sure that I was okay. I mean, do you know how powerful that was for me? Just to know how much these guys cared. I think there's a huge lesson in this for those of us who are either battling cancer or are around people who are experiencing cancer and their families that are experiencing that cancer with them, because it's not an individual cancer. It's a cancer that incorporates the entire family and impacts the entire family. And so having people come into your life that just love you in the midst of your pain and suffering is a very powerful thing. And so that night in that room, along with all those teammates coming in, those 5 or 6 guys that hung out with me till like 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning were like a breath of fresh air, were a gift from God in comforting me in the midst of a very difficult place. We were really hungry. All of us were extremely hungry because I had to leave, so I didn't get in line to have the spread after they came. And so as a funny part of this story, Scotty Garrelts went down and got a cab, and he found the first restaurant that was open, and it was a Burger King. And I swear he must have spent $300 on burgers, because he came back with more burgers than any of us could eat. But we were so grateful that we had a whole bed full of food, burgers and fries to munch on while we were sitting there fellowshipping over what God was doing in my story. It was that conversation. It wasn't, oh my gosh, Dave, are you okay? This is horrible. I can't believe it. Your career could be threatened. No, we were like the disciples who were in the boat when the storm hit and Jesus was sleeping, and all of a sudden they get frantic and they wake him up, and he calms the waters and the winds. And the next thing you hear in the conversation with the disciples is, we're in awe of this. Is absolute awe. What have we just experienced? Who is this that has just calmed the seas and calmed the wind? And that's what it felt like in that room with Jesus using these men to calm the storm that was going on in my life. And I share all of that with you because as all of them left and I was about to go to bed, Atlee Hammaker stopped and he said, "Hey, do you think you want to take one of those pain pills before you go to sleep?" Bruce, from the time I had broken my arm, through the x-rays at the hospital, the doctor's visit, the prescription of the drugs, the conversation that lasted till 2:30 in the morning, I had no pain medication. None. And then finally I decided to take one to get to sleep. And then the next morning got up early, had a press conference, which was amazing in and of itself because the question came. No one would ask me a question. I'm in the suite of Al Rosen, the president of the ball club, and they're all staring at me, and I'm in this suite, and nobody's asking me anything. And all of a sudden, and I think they were overwhelmed with the fact that I was in a sling, and they had just seen something horrific happen, and my career had come to an end, more than likely. And one of the reporters, a guy by the name of Cohen, says, "Dave, where's your God now?" And Bruce, I was overwhelmed with the question because you see, all too often in the world of sports, and I'm not saying this is wrong, but we're always pointing upward and giving glory when there's success. And I did the same thing when I made the comeback game. I made it very clear that I wanted to thank my Lord and Savior Jesus for the opportunity to be back on the mound pitching again. But now, 5 days later, Mr. Cohen asks the question, "So where is your God now?" And you know, the thing that was so amazing about that was that God took over and responded through me. And I was able to say, he hasn't gone anywhere. He's been in my heart through the mountaintop experience, and he's with me in the valley. And now in the valley, just as I trusted him to get to the mountaintop, he'll trust me to work my way through the valley. I'll trust him to work my way through the valley. And it will be he that gives me the strength to get through that valley. And that was a very important and pivotal moment in my life as a cancer patient, as one who was in tremendous pain with a broken arm and having the uncertainty of the future, again, maybe having to face his mortality, to know that God was in the middle of my story, giving me the strength to endure the journey, but also the promise that whether I live or die, I will be with him in eternity. That hope is actually what gave me strength to move forward in relationship to facing the uncertainty of the future. And it was not friendly to me. It was extremely difficult because now I was forced to retire. The cancer did come back, not once, not twice, but 3 times. Now all of a sudden I'm going through radiation therapy that weakens my arm to the point where I get a staph infection that then threatens my life. And now the doctors are saying it's time to remove your left arm and shoulder. And then I have the amputation on June 18th of 1991. And so in that span from retiring in November of 1989 to 1991, you can only imagine what my journey was like. The emotional and the spiritual and the physical roller coaster got steeper and steeper and deeper and deeper. And the highs shrunk. And it almost felt like there was a season of life where I just steadily stayed in this dark spot and struggled tremendously. Did I doubt that God existed? No. Did I doubt my faith? No. But did I have questions? Absolutely. Did I get answers? To some of them, but not all of them. And I think sometimes in life, you just don't get answers to some of those hard questions. And yet the question begs itself, will I still trust God and the people around me to find the strength to get through this thing? And on June 18th, when they removed my left arm and shoulder, this is really interesting, Bruce. I actually thought that if you got rid of my arm and my shoulder, you'd get rid of all my problems. And the reality was that my problems had just begun, because now I was face to face with looking in the mirror. And in this Zoom call, you can tell my left arm is gone. So that's what I saw when I looked in the mirror. Who's going to hire that man? How's he going to make a living? How's he going to put food on the table? How's he going to put clothes on his kids' backs? How's he going to take care and put a roof over our family's head? How am I going to do that? Yes, I played professional baseball. Yes, I got paid well, but I was not $1 million ball player. I was not a multi-million-dollar ball player. I had to find a job after I retired. And so I'm left with the frustration of wondering, how am I going to care? The fear and the despair started to creep in. And then in the frustration of all of that, I started to get angry. And in my anger, I became verbally abusive to my family. And I was in a horrible place. And I was barely holding on in relationship to my journey with God. But you know what I discovered? When I no longer had the strength to hold on, I realized he was holding on to me. And I could trust that his gentle caress was going to be there through this darkest moment. So how was I going to get out of it? And again, through the love of others, Bruce, I was able to get on the other side. And I'm grateful to be able to tell that story now. My wife and I both went through counseling. We went on antidepressants. We were loved well by people in the church that showed us what Jesus with skin on really looks like. I mean, we experienced a lot of wonderful things in the midst of some very difficult things. And that's why I'm so grateful to be here to share my story with you in relationship to that, because I know there's a lot of people out there battling cancer right now who have gone through it that can shake their head and go, yeah, Dave, I understand. I get everything you're talking about, or are sitting there going, oh my gosh, I'm in the middle of this and I don't know how I'm going to get through. And that's where I hope that these words give hope and give strength to be able to get through to the other side.
Dave, what were some of the things, now that you're without a left arm, what were some of the things you couldn't do, and what are some of the things physically you can do?
Well, that's really interesting you asked that question, because I've discovered that I'm not limited that much at all. Sure, it would be easier to do things with two hands. It would be much easier to do things with two hands than one. But when I got to the other side and I was finally healthy, I mean, my wife and I were in counseling for 30 months. I went to counseling with her for 18 months to work on our individual issues. But in the process, we discovered it strengthened our marriage, because I was actually learning the art of communication. She had already known how to communicate well, but I was now in the middle of learning to communicate what was going on inside, instead of stuffing it and then becoming angry. And then for 12 months, she went with me to a counselor to deal with my anger issues. And that was one of the greatest gifts ever. And it was beautiful. And it was all from a Christian perspective, and learning how to let go and trust God with your story. And it obviously goes a lot deeper than that. But once I got to the other side, I'm an athlete. There's all these challenges in front of me. I love to play golf. Can I still do that? So I went out and I started trying to play golf. And I had a blast. Now, I didn't score very well, but one of the things I loved about playing golf was, first of all, you get on a 40-acre piece of land and it's beautiful. And then you go with 3 other guys that are good friends and you can have a really good time. That, to me, with those friends, was priceless. That time was priceless. So I've really enjoyed playing golf. I had to stop because I'm not very good, I would bury the club a little too deep, and it put a lot of stress on my shoulder. And it got to the point where after 30 years of double use with my right arm, because my left arm was gone, that I developed arthritis. And 7.5 weeks ago, I had a shoulder replacement. But I can tell you, Bruce, as I'm sitting here, there was a time where this was as far as I could raise my shoulder. 7.5 weeks out from getting a brand new shoulder, my arm has more flexibility now and range of motion than I had prior to the surgery. So I'm looking forward to, and I talked to the doctors and asked them, can I set a goal to play golf again? And he said, absolutely. So that's one of the things I want to do. The other thing I enjoy doing is fishing. And I'm not a big fisherman, but it's a challenge. How can you catch fish with one arm? And so I loved that challenge. And those are the kind of things, anything that threw a challenge in front of me because of my quote unquote limitations, I had to try. And so I love to snow ski. Now, it'd be much more difficult without a leg. Trust me, I get that. But losing an arm, balance is critical on a ski slope. And so being able to ski, we lived in Colorado for 19 years. And so during that time, we were up in the mountains every year skiing, and the kids learned to ski there. And we just had a wonderful time doing that. So all that to say is that I really don't feel like I'm limited, even though I only have one arm. And I'm extremely grateful for the new doctors that God brought in my life to do the shoulder replacement, because it was really their expertise in doing what they do to fix this right arm that I'm going to be able to be back using it again and enjoying all those things that I love to do.
Dave, you've talked about your cancer journey, and then you've also incorporated another journey, your spiritual journey, and it seems like the two of them sort of come together with the ministry you have now, the Endurance Foundation. Can you tell us a little bit about its genesis and what it's doing now?
Yes, it originally started as an opportunity because the Giants had Dave Dravecky Day, and they were selling some articles around my comeback story. And so as a result of that, they said from the sale of those proceeds, they would donate to the charity of my choice. And so what we did was we set up a foundation, the Dave Dravecky Foundation, for them to give the funds to, and then it would allow me to give it wherever I wanted to. Well, what I didn't know, Bruce, was once we had set up that foundation, during the time of my comeback, I was receiving literally tens of thousands of pieces of mail, to the point where we were overwhelmed with Army gunny sacks that were being stacked in my garage. I couldn't park my car. And so when we set up the foundation, it gave us a vehicle through which we could start responding to all the mail. And there were people who were literally sharing their stories of pain and suffering. And so Endurance with Jan and Dave Dravecky was birthed out of those people sharing their stories with us and our desire to encourage them. And so from there, what we did, because we started publishing our story, and we had Come Back as our first story, and then the follow-up book was When You Can't Come Back. And then Jan and I each wrote a book. I wrote The Worth of a Man, and she wrote A Joy I'd Never Known. And that was the 4 books that were in essence our story. And it was through the love of the game, the diagnosis of cancer, the comeback, the retirement, the journey through pain and suffering, the amputation, the depression, the identity crisis, to then the lessons learned in The Worth of a Man and A Joy I'd Never Known. And so what we did was we started taking that and putting it in a little gift box and sending it off to people to encourage them in their stories. And 30 years later, we've added more resources from others who could speak to the issue of pain and suffering from a spiritual perspective. We've written more books, and we've done a Bible project with Johnny Erickson Tata, a quadriplegic, who joined with us to co-edit the New International Version Bible into what we call the Encouragement Bible. And so on every page of that Bible are words of encouragement along with the scriptures from saints and people from the past who have gone through pain and suffering and have something to say to encourage us. Those resources, we box them up and we send them as a free gift to people who are hurting. So for any of your audience today, all they would have to do is go to endurance.org, and there is a place that they can click on to receive an encouragement gift box, and that will come to them. And if you have a friend that you know, you go online and as a gift to that friend, send an encouragement gift box from our website on behalf of you to encourage that family. And every family member that we receive a request from gets prayed for, and a note is sent to them that says that we have prayed for them, because oftentimes people will say, I'll pray for you, and they walk away and they forget. I've done that. And so we've been intentional in saying, we're going to pray for you, and here's the evidence that we have. And then from there are other resources that people can get through Endurance for encouragement as well. And I also provide, we provide a bookstore, because all the products that are sold through our bookstore, the proceeds come back to Endurance to be able to buy more product to send at no cost to the families who are hurting. So that's one of the ways that we're able to raise some funds to help us continue doing what we're doing. So Endurance has been around for 30 years, and it has been a privilege and an honor to be able to be given permission to step onto sacred ground, and that sacred ground is that person's journey through pain and suffering.
And one more time, that's endurance.org, correct?
Yes, endurance.org.
Okay, Dave, we're going to wrap up now. And whereas a lot of our interviews always start from the same place, we kind of like to end from the same place. And the question I'm going to ask you, in part, you've already answered, but if you end up saying the second thing twice, it's still a good message out there that's being expressed twice. But Dave, if you had an opportunity, and I suspect you have many of these opportunities, but if you have an opportunity to have a private audience with somebody who has just been diagnosed with cancer, or they found out that there's a possibility they could be diagnosed, if you had one overarching thing you would want to say to them, what would that be?
Don't be afraid to allow others to enter into your story and to journey with you. Don't be afraid to cry out to God for help. Don't be afraid to ask questions. And the thing that we have discovered that has been so important to us, Bruce, is that on this journey, we need hope. And there's a verse that I want to share, that I would share with people from 2 Corinthians 4:16 through 18, that says this: "Therefore, we do not lose heart. Though outwardly we are wasting away, yet inwardly we are being renewed day by day. For our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. So we fix our eyes not on what is seen, but what is unseen. For what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal." The hope that I had in the midst of the uncertainty of my life, with the possible diagnosis of cancer and the diagnosis of cancer, was knowing that because of my faith and trust in Jesus, this verse is real to me. And the encouragement in this verse is to not lose heart. Do not lose heart. And in that process, invite people into the story that you trust, who will walk with you, who will love you, who will help you and do all they can so that you can endure the journey. That's one of the things we've learned in changing the name of our ministry to Endurance from Outreach of Hope, is that this life is about enduring. And it's not just about surviving, it's about thriving, even in the midst of the most difficult of times. And so those are the things that I would say. Jesus loves you, this I know, for the Bible tells me so. My hope is in him. And I can lose heart because of that. I do not lose heart because of that.
All right, Dave, thanks very much for sharing a message that is inspiring on multiple levels. And as we said at the beginning, we hope as you watch or listen that this is a message that has resonated with you. And if it has, by all means, share it with a friend. Dave Dravecky, thanks so much for taking the time to talk with us.
It's my pleasure, Bruce. Thank you.
And that's going to wrap up this segment of Cancer Interviews. Again, we hope that what you heard will aid with your cancer journey or for that of a loved one. So until next time, we'll see you on down the road.
Thanks for joining us today. For more information, please visit us online at cancerinterviews.com. We appreciate you tuning in, and we'll see you back here again next time on the Cancer Interviews Podcast.